Hi, I'm Andrea. I work as a personal assistant. I have to be in an office at 9 a.m. I mustn't be late. I must do everything in time. I should make notes quickly and shouldn't miss anything. My boss is really demanding. I need to do everything she says, but I don't have to make her coffee. Yesterday, my boss had an important meeting, so I had to organize everything. I had to make hundreds of phone calls. The meeting preparation took much time. I needn't have prepared so many copies, and I should have checked what to print. Luckily, I didn't need to assist my boss at the meeting. I think I should have worked overtime because I'm exhausted today. Today we're going to learn how to use modal verbs. A modal verb have to is used to express obligation, necessity, and duty. We needed to talk about law, regulation, somebody's decision, rule, and demand. Andrea says, I have to be in an office at 9 a.m. In other words, Andrea is obliged to be at work at 9 a.m. Or, it's necessary for Andrea to be at office at 9 o'clock. A modal verb have to is used in the form has to in the third person singular with he, she, it. To complete a sentence, we start with a subject, then have or has to plus a verb. Andrea has to start work at 9 a.m. She has to make phone calls. We have to finish the project till Friday. They have to work with clients. Don't have to or doesn't have to are used to express a lack of obligation or necessity, which means you may do it only if you want. Andrea doesn't have to make coffee for her boss, which means Andrea is not obliged to make coffee for her boss. Do not or does not have to are used to express lack of obligation in present. They are often used as contractions. In a sentence, we start with a subject, then don't or doesn't have to plus a verb. Andrea doesn't have to cook for her boss. They don't have to reply all emails. We need had to talk about past obligation, necessity, or duty. Andrea said she had to organize everything. In other words, Andrea had to prepare everything for the meeting, which means she was obliged to organize everything. They had to discuss a lot of issues at the meeting. He had to bake a cake for his client. Didn't have to is necessary to talk about a lack of obligation or necessity in the past. Andrea didn't have to help her boss at the meeting. It was not necessary to assist her boss at the meeting. To express a lack of obligation or necessity in the past in a sentence, we need to start with a subject, then did, not, have to, and a verb. Andrea did not have to cook for her boss. They didn't have to work on Saturday. Tara didn't have to finish her project till Friday. He didn't have to buy Sarah a present. A modal verb must is necessary to express obligation, necessity, or strong advice. We needed to talk about law, regulation, rule, demand, or express speaker's decision. Andrea says, I must do everything in time, which means Andrea must meet deadlines. It's her obligation. Andrea must learn English. It's her own decision. Modals must and have to can be equally used to express necessity, obligation, or duty in present. Andrea must answer phone calls. Andrea has to answer phone calls. Both these sentences are equal. Making an affirmative sentence with obligation in present, we begin with subject, then must, and a verb. Andrea must get to work at 9 a.m. She must make notes and phone calls. He must teach students at school. David must water plants every day. To ask a question about present obligation or necessity, we start with must, then subject and the verb. Must Andrea work on Mondays? Must she drive her boss home? Must we protect polar bears? Yes, we must. Must Jill eat many sweets? No, she mustn't. We need mustn't to talk about prohibition, when something is forbidden or not allowed. Andrea says, I mustn't be late, which means she can't be late. Andrea mustn't leave an office till the end of her working day, because it's not allowed. When we complete a negative sentence with mustn't, to express things we are not allowed to do, we start with the subject, add mustn't and the verb. Andrea mustn't come late to the office. She mustn't miss deadlines. You mustn't smoke in public places. You mustn't park your car here. Needn't or don't need to is important when we talk about a lack of necessity in present. Andrea needn't make coffee for her boss. Andrea doesn't need to make coffee for her boss because it's not necessary. Both these sentences are equal. To express a lack of necessity or obligation, we can equally use three structures: needn't plus a verb, doesn't need to plus a verb, and doesn't have to plus a verb. Let's look at the sentences given. Andrea needn't cook breakfast for her boss. Andrea doesn't need to cook breakfast for her boss. Andrea doesn't have to cook breakfast for her boss. All these sentences are similar and express an idea that there is no necessity for Andrea to cook for her boss. Didn't need to is important when we express a lack of necessity in the past. Andrea didn't need to assist her boss at the meeting, which means Andrea had no necessity to do it and she wasn't at the meeting. Lack of necessity or obligation in the past can be equally expressed with didn't need to and didn't have to. Andrea didn't need to discuss anything at the meeting. Andrea didn't have to discuss anything at the meeting. Both these sentences are similar and express the idea that there was no need for Andrea to talk about something with other people at the meeting. If we did something which was not necessary in the past, we use needn't have done. Andrea said, I needn't have prepared so many copies, which means Andrea needn't have made a lot of copies because she did more than her boss ordered. Andrea did something which was not necessary. To complete a sentence about something unnecessary we did in the past, we start with a subject, add needn't, have, and a verb in past participle. If a verb is regular, we add ed. If a verb is irregular, we use irregular verb table and the third form of irregular verb, which is also called past participle. Andrea needn't have printed so many documents. She needn't have used so much paper. You needn't have cooked so many dishes because we can't eat everything. I needn't have bought so many dresses because I spent a fortune. A modal verb should and its negative form shouldn't is used to describe present recommendation, advice, ideal or desired situation. Andrea says, I should make notes quickly and I shouldn't miss anything because she knows it's important for her work. Andrea should do everything quickly to cope with work. It's ideal situation. Making a sentence with should, we begin with subject, then should, and the verb. Andrea should be polite to her boss. She should try hard. You should brush your teeth twice a day. You should eat fresh fruit and vegetables. To make a recommendation with shouldn't, we begin with subject, then shouldn't, and the verb. Andrea shouldn't skip lunch. She shouldn't drink much coffee. Children shouldn't go to bed late. You shouldn't eat fast food. To ask a question, we begin with should, then subject, and the verb. Should Andrea rest in the evening? Should she go out at the weekend? Should children drink milk? Yes, they should. Should you eat much chocolate? No, we shouldn't. Should and shouldn't are also necessary to talk about past regret, sorrow, or criticism. Andrea said, I shouldn't have worked overtime, which means she regrets that she worked overtime. I should have rested from work. It's also regret. Andrea shouldn't have done so much because she got very tired. Criticism. To complete an affirmative sentence with should describing past sorrow or regret, we start with subject, then should, have, and the verb in past participle. If the verb is regular, we add ed, like worked, lived, stayed. If the verb is irregular, we need the third column of irregular verbs, like been, gone, had, etc. Andrea should have planned her working day carefully to find time for rest. Andrea should have gone out with friends to relax. I should have left home earlier not to miss the bus. You should have done your homework yesterday. When we complete a negative sentence, to express past sorrows and regrets, we start with the subject, then shouldn't, have, and past participle, a verb with ed if it's regular, and third column of irregular verbs. Andrea shouldn't have worked so much because she was exhausted. Andrea shouldn't have spent so much time working. I shouldn't have drunk so much coffee because I had a sleepless night. You shouldn't have eaten so many cakes because you are unwell now. What about you? What are your duties? Write in comments. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to learn English.